Hello and welcome to another video on neurophysiology. Today we're going to talk about sensory receptors. The first thing we need to think about is, what is a receptor? Well, simply said, a receptor is a structure in our body that responds to different changes, technically called stimuli, and converts them into electrochemical energy, which can then be transmitted to the central nervous system. We classify receptors by the type of stimulus that activates them. We have 5 basic types: mechanoreceptors, thermoreceptors, nociceptors, photoreceptors, some also classify them as electromagnetic receptors, and chemoreceptors. Let's look at them one by one. Mechanoreceptors are activated by pressure or change in pressure. To give you an example, there are baroreceptors in the carotid sinus, which react to blood pressure so that it can be regulated. Thermoreceptors, as you can imagine, are activated by changes in temperature. We have receptors that detect cold and others that detect warmth. Then, nociceptors are pain receptors, which detect extreme changes, extreme pressure, temperature, etc., or damage in the tissue. Photoreceptors are activated by light, that's easy, and chemoreceptors are activated by chemicals. They are important, for example, for olfaction, so smell in the nose, taste. They also detect the concentration of carbon dioxide, which is important for breathing, or the level of oxygen in the arterial blood. Receptors are connected to a nerve, which terminates somewhere in the central nervous system. Now, these nerves only transmit one type of sensation, depending on where they terminate in the nervous system. So, for example, if the receptor is connected to a nerve that terminates in a center of the brain involved in processing pain, it will only transmit the sensation of pain, but not any others. This very important principle is called labeled line principle, and it again means that a nerve can only transmit one type of sensation. Now let's look at how receptors convert a stimulus into electromechanical energy in more detail. First thing we need to know is that this process is called sensory transduction. This sensory transduction happens, like almost everything in physiology, by ion channels. The process is as follows. First, there's a stimulus, and this stimulus excites the receptor, which can happen in different ways, which we've already discussed, by light, change in temperature, etc. And this excitation leads to a change in the receptor's membrane permeability. This allows certain ions to diffuse through the membrane and change the receptor's membrane potential. This change in the receptor's membrane potential is called receptor potential. Now, if the receptor potential reaches threshold, so a certain value that is needed for eliciting an action potential is elicited and transmitted through the nerve that is connected to the receptor. And the information that the receptor reacted to is transmitted through the central nervous system. Now, another characteristic of sensory receptors is that they have a very broad range of response, so that they can react to both weak and extreme stimulation. When there's a very strong stimulus and the excitation of the receptor is strong, there's a greater receptor potential, which changes the frequency of action potential, which increases considerably. The last thing we need to mention is that receptors are able to adapt, at least partially, if they are constantly stimulated. What changes is the rate of generating action potentials, which slowly decreases once the receptor starts to adapt. You can think of receptor adaptation as of medical students. First, When they enter med school and discover how much stress there is and all the things that they have to learn, they're devastated and stress all the time. But as time goes by, they just slowly get used to it. The stress is still there, but maybe not as often as in the beginning. And that's exactly what adaptation of receptors is. The thing is that some receptors adapt more quickly than others, and that's why we divide receptors into two groups. The first group consists of slowly adapting receptors that we call tonic receptors, which continue to transmit impulses as long as the stimulus is present, or for a very long time until they adapt. The second group, the so-called phasic receptors, adapt rapidly to the stimulus. They are still, however, able to react to the stimulus if it's stronger. Again, you can imagine these two groups as medical students who just need different amount of time to adapt to medical school, if it helps you to remember it better. Okay, so this is it for sensory receptors and neurophysiology. I hope you found this video useful and that you're starting to find neurophysiology at least a bit interesting. For more videos on physiology or medicine in general, please subscribe. Thank you again, and until next time, don't forget that medicine can be easy.